JCR my first year was tough. Flag has been a very contentious issue at Jesus. See, I think this is the frustration issue. When I was running my campaign, I think that I would have tried to be a bit more civil with college. Actually, we are one of the richest colleges in Kent. One of the big conflicts, I think on call is the only way to explain it. Any time you can be summoned. I don't know, like CV padding or... But I think personally, I struggled with pass rates. Coming into Cambridge, parents didn't go to university... She didn't finish high school. My older sister didn't finish high school. It's just really trying to understand your privilege and not compare your struggles with the struggles of other people. Westminster, their parents have to work really hard. A super defensive culture. I remember seeing it. I just screamed, jumped. I was like, this is crazy. Because I think that I always had confidence in myself. Like, you have to go and do a vacation scheme, or you have to go and do investment banking. I was you 6 years ago. You can do it too. I'm a lost man, honestly. It's tough. It's something I've been struggling with the last week because
send your kids to a private school.
Absolutely right. I don't think it's like you can't date someone who's had a vastly different education. There are definitely some great questions.
Jezz Brown is a second-year HSPS student at Jesus College. Having now finished his terms as JCR President and President of the Class Act campaign, Jezz continues his passion for moving forward whilst giving back in his role as National Learning and Development Director at the 93% Foundation. A passionate advocate of the power of educational champions, when he gets to escape Cambridge, Jezz works part-time as a Pupil Premium mentor at his old high school, to which he accredits his success. Jezz hopes to spend the rest of his time in Cambridge supporting community initiatives, making Cambridge more accessible and trying to make himself do his work. Jezz likes to spend his time procrastinating by playing basketball and keeping up with politics. Jezz, congratulations on completing Michaelmas term and for all your achievements, and welcome to my podcast, Coffee's on Me, David Quan.
Thanks, man. It's great to be here.
So, I read an article once about cultural shock at Cambridge, swim or you will drown. Have you been swimming or have you been drowning?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting... I think that this is something that I put out last year. But I think it's a difficult one for me. I think that I definitely consider myself a swimmer. I think that I have quite a mentality in the sense that that's the wrong word to use, isn't it? But yeah, I think that for me with culture shock at Cambridge, there are definitely a lot of things that can be irritating, a lot of things that can be quite confusing at first. But my mentality with these sorts of things is that you've got to just push through. And I think that the article was really just about not being bogged down in all of the strange cultural enigmas that there are at Cambridge, and sort of really just trying to stride forward with that which you pride yourself with.
I guess when I looked at your involvements in Cambridge, and accessibility, inclusivity is obviously a major theme and something you're very passionate about, and I would love to delve more into the tangible issues that still are structural concerns. But before then, I would love to focus more on the swim aspects of all the stuff that you've done well. Second year now, what are you proud of in your time at Cambridge?
Yeah, I think that doing JCR in my first year was tough. And I think really just making it out of first year with what I would consider personally to be a decent mark, whilst I like to think making my college a safer and friendlier and more communal space. And I think that to have done that coming into Cambridge with a lot of concerns about the environment and the culture and the workload and how things would be in practice rather than just on paper. I think that, I would just say that my first year in particular, I'm very proud to have managed to get out of first year with all that I did.
Absolutely, and I think to serve in a role as JCR President representing 450 undergrads when you're still trying to learn the system and the challenges along the way is massive. And some of the achievements that I saw that you had were such as, producing a 50-page report about the welfare system. You campaigned to change the flag protocol. You lobbied for, improvements to college entrances and everything, and on and on and on. Out of all of that, which one was the most difficult to campaign for, and why?
Well, I think there's two sides to that. I think, well, firstly, I should say that all of those things that we've achieved in my time as JCR President are, very much down to the hard work of the committee as well. Maddie for the welfare review, Yuval for the flags, Izzy for the entrances. Like, people have put in like a real shift to make Jesus a better place over the last year. I think that the most difficult to campaign for was the difficult one. I think that practically the most difficult was the flags. The college really made a big deal about budging on it. Flags has been a very contentious issue at Jesus for a number of years, both what flags the college flies on their own flagpole and what students are able to do with flags, i.e. having them in their windows, on the outside of their windows and whatnot.
Where does the resistance come from with flags?
See, I think this is the frustration. There seems to be a bit of a mix. I think that some people question the point of it in the first place. Like, why does this even matter? By people, I mean, senior members of college fellows. I think some people get too bogged down in the floodgates argument. They say, if we, fly this flag, it means that we have to fly all of the flags, which is, a ridiculous proposition. I would like to think that there isn't really any animosity to the actual idea of flying the flags, but it at times it did feel almost like there was a underlying problem with flying it in the first place. But I do think it was weirdly made to be a much bigger thing than it was, and it shouldn't have been something that lasted a number of months in my term and a number of years in total.
And in terms of your role, and you mentioned about your committee, did you guys, obviously coming from different backgrounds as well, did you have any challenges of determining on which issues to pursue? Because I can imagine sometimes you got to make compromises on certain things, and how did you navigate that process?
Yeah, that is one of the difficulties really of having such a large committee. It's a committee of 19 at Jesus. But I think that actually, I'm very proud of the work of our committee, and I think that we did a really good job of supporting one another. And everyone was sort of working on their own projects. And I don't think there was really at any point many times where we had to say, actually, no, we can't work on that. We'll do it later maybe. Because it was sort of a case of one officer or a number of officers would work on a particular project. And when it was ready to go through the governance process, then I would pick it up and take it through. So I think that we worked well in that sense. But I do think there's definitely a risk of, you only have 1 year, there are a lot of things to challenge.
Not to mention that you were a fresher. I mean, to have the confidence, I'm sure some people on your committee were second years or even third years who would obviously feel like they know the place. And did you have any struggles with asserting authority or having a right direction when you yourself was trying to figure out the landscape?
Yeah, I think that it was a concern of mine, but I think, again, in practice, it didn't end up being too much of an issue. When I was running my campaign, because it was only 6 weeks into my first term in Cambridge, my entire campaign was 70% of my campaign was I can still do it even if I'm a fresher. And then 30% was this is what I'll actually do if you let me. Because there was such an animosity amongst some second and third years to the idea of a fresher winning. Because it hasn't happened at Jesus, in a long time, if at all. So when I came into the role, I think I'd already established myself as being competent enough to lead, particularly having relevant experience doing, the same job at my sixth form with quite a large student body.
Right.
I think that set me in good instead. But also, I had some good friends in the above by this point who were on the committee and really supported me in those early stages.
I mean, for me, leadership is almost like a reverse pyramid where, people see the leader at the top and leading, and obviously you're the face of the committee, but actually behind the scenes, you're the one empowering other people to flourish and have their visions achieved, what would you consider to be your leadership style?
Yeah, I think it's a very situational thing. I think that like sometimes I can be very like, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, and like sort of pushing things to the committee and being like, let's run with this. And I think that's just the nature of the role sometimes. But I think my preferable leadership style is really about, you know, treating the JCSU or the JCR committee as like a level playing field, and letting ideas bounce around, and really recognising that everybody on the committee is as far as I'm concerned, in the room, the expert on their particular issue.
Yep.
And as much as you might have the president title, actually, you know, the ERM officer is much more equipped to be, you know, leading on issues relating to their role, and the same thing applies with all roles. So I think that you really cannot be a successful JCR committee, or any committee really, if you don't treat everybody as, you know, as a leader in their unique area.
If you were to do the role again, was there anything that you would have done differently?
I think that I would have maybe I think that I would have tried to be a little bit more civil with college from the beginning. I think that like the committee have had some tenuous relationships, and coming in, I was very much hoping that we would maintain like friendly relationships between the student leadership and college leadership. But quite quickly I became frustrated, and I think that we maybe could have got some things, you know, done quicker if we'd had more open lines of communication.
Because obviously you had to deal with the master, the bursar, the senior tutors, etc. All had their different priorities, and if you could maybe elaborate a bit more on how those priorities had conflicted and led to the tensions, that would be quite interesting.
Well, I mean, the bursar, to start with, you know, the birth is the sort of phrase that gets pushed around by us is like, the birth is made sure that the college has stayed running for 500 years, and he's got to make sure that it's still here in 500 years. And in his mind, that is, you know, let's not spend any money, because we need the money to be there in 500 years. Yep. So when it comes to, actually, we are one of the richest colleges in Cambridge. We are a massively privileged institution with the capacity to offer great things to our students and to the community at large as well. We want the college to spend more money in places, and of course they don't want to. Unless, you know, you can really, really prove that it's necessary, and often that it's in line with, you know, what other colleges are doing. I think that the old senior tutor, in my opinion, was a little bit more detached from the student body, whereas the new senior tutor who's just come in is actually, I think, excellent and really, really rooted in trying to understand the student experience and take that forward. I think with the master, you know, I think we have a great professional relationship, and we have many of the same passions, but I think that one of the big conflicts was always that we want Jesus College to be the college that is pioneering sustainability, pioneering diversity, you know, pioneering like having the best welfare system, you know, of any college in Cambridge, that we want to be the best of the best. And sometimes they view change as only necessary when it's to keep in line with other colleges. And I think that was one of the main points of conflict over the year.
So was at the time when you were elected, was Jesus already ahead? Like, you know, you mentioned about being in line, or was Jesus playing more of a catch-up game?
So for sustainability, we were ranked the best in Oxford and Cambridge.
Oh, wow.
But there is definitely more to be done for divestment. Both, you know, environmental and ethical divestment. But the college really has put in a shift. And there really is, amongst the fellowship, a drive to be, you know, a net zero real sustainable college. When it comes to diversity, I think we do well, but we need to do better. I'm not sure how we compare to other colleges, really, in the ranking there. And welfare, I think that we have some unique difficulties that other colleges don't have. But that you know, it's true of lots of things. For example, like one of our attempted policies this year was one of our attempted changes this year was to encourage college to fund to subsidise sports participation for university levels, and we showed that like lots of other colleges were doing that, and the colleges were like, yeah, actually no, like if you can get the alumni to pay for it, then we'll do it.
Right.
And so it's that constant battle.
I think a lot of freshers coming into university obviously want to make a difference to their community, and a part of our application we need to explain why we want to come into this place. The more darker side of the role is just how all-absorbing it is. I can imagine that you have a dozen meetings a week and feeling like being on call. Could you maybe share a bit about the commitment and whether at any point it was not what people on the outside would imagine it to be?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's. I think on call is the only way to explain it. Like, it really feels like at any time you can be summoned by a student, by staff, by the master, by whatever. Like recently, there's been some stuff on our confessions page, Jesus Confessions page, which has been like, what does the JCSU actually do? And I wish the JCSU would spend less time commenting on like JFESs and more time doing stuff. And it's like, do you want me to give you my like day by day breakdown of what I've done? Because it wouldn't be pleasant to read. I think that people don't realise that sometimes you lose entire days. Like you can have a day planned out, scheduled to the minute of what work you're going to do, and then suddenly a student sends you an email about that they're in a crisis, or a member of staff has said something to them, or whatever it is, the college hasn't put the flag up, or like just there's an issue, and you have to almost like put your cape on and then run and go and solve the crisis at cost of whatever else you're doing at that point.
Absolutely, and I think the behind the scenes work is often underappreciated. And in fact, I did the telephone campaign for the college this time last year, and I always thought that I knew what that role was about, but when you actually do it for a few weeks and have all those people hanging up on you, like it's very demoralizing, and you make so many of those calls. And I think after that experience, one of the things was that when I end up getting one of these advertisement calls, even if I wasn't going to purchase a product, or even if I didn't really want to engage, I won't just hang up. I would say it politely and wish them a good day.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, on a similar vein, having now gone through such a significant leadership role where you have been so-called uncool, do you feel like you have built more empathy for other people's roles, and have your attitude in other areas of life changed?
Yeah, I think that there's almost a positive and a negative side to it. There's like, on the positive side, it's you realise that like with roles that you didn't necessarily understand or haven't done yourself, that it's almost universally demystifying, and you realise that there's so much going on all of the time with people that you don't necessarily see, and I think that's important. I think the negative side of it is there's sometimes a frustration that like having like being in one of these situations myself, like being one of these roles myself, when others are sometimes, I don't know, like CV padding or like stacking up roles that they don't fully give all that they have to. I think that can be frustrating. But I think that it is a role that really forces you to build more empathy, because you have to seek to understand so many different experiences, because you represent such a diverse population of students, and you see such a diverse range of issues, and it really does sort of like broaden your mind to the experiences that other people have that you might not even have realised were like, even possible.
Absolutely, and building on that point of diversity, roughly a week ago, you were in Manchester for a national level up event, and there you met 200 state-educated students and employers, etc. How were their experiences similar to yours and different? Now, given your working class background, but you've also now spent almost 2 years at Cambridge and serving in these big leadership roles where you have seen the behind the scenes of the operations. Yeah,
so I think that like with this event and with the 93% Foundation, we all come from state school. We all come from state schools, but we know that that's a diverse category in itself. personally, the state school that I came from is, very underfunded. Well, it looks underfunded, but it historically has struggled with a lot of issues, and it's in a very deprived area, and serving a very difficult body of students in the sense that they've come from difficult backgrounds, and so it's not necessarily the same as some state schools, or even grammar schools that are included in that category. But I think that there's an almost universal state school experience which is when contrasted with the private schools, and particularly on opportunities available. I think we all feel the same way about how it's a little bit harder for us to gain opportunities and to understand how to get an internship or how to make it into a particular sector. I think where my experience differs a lot is just in the privilege of being at Cambridge. I think that people don't realise sometimes the sheer volume of opportunities you're afforded purely because of the institution that you go to. For the last few weeks, I've been out to dinner with a number of law firms, which is a ridiculous idea. The fact that some law firm is going to come from London to Cambridge to take you out to dinner, and below £800 on, 12 random, 19, 20-year-olds, I think those are opportunities that, aren't necessarily given to a lot of other students at other universities. So I think that's one area where it differs.
So, you have these dinners with these fancy law firms, and it's quite nice to have an open bar and to be able to spend whatever you want knowing that they will reimburse. It reminds me of the class traitor narrative.
Yeah.
And have you experienced any of that personally, and could you maybe give some context on what that means?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, literally, I was at one the other day, and I was talking to some of my boys from home at the time, and I was like, oh, look at this is ridiculous, and I sent them a picture of the table. I was like, this is free, and I got 7 Tory spams in the chat, and I was like, and I get it a lot, and I don't mind it from my mates because I get it, it's taking the mick a little bit, but I have friends at other unis who they'll see me post a picture in a tux on my Instagram, and they'll be like, oh, you're such a class traitor, ha ha ha. And I think it's frustrating because it's almost it's that duality that you're forced into. You're forced to be the Cambridge version of yourself and the home version of yourself sometimes. But I don't think that I've ever personally really thought too deeply into the class traitor stuff, in the sense that I've never really let anybody else make me feel bad about being at Cambridge and the opportunities that I'm afforded because I'm at Cambridge. But I think personally I struggle sometimes with the class traitor stuff. I think when I'm here and I'm at these silly balls, or I'm writing essays about things that just really don't matter. Sometimes I do question whether or not I could be trying to make a real difference and trying to serve the people of my community who aren't afforded these opportunities. So I don't think that I've really felt much external pressure, but maybe internal pressure on the class traitor issue.
On that, in your reflection on Medium after first year, you wrote that navigating the toxic landscape of these elite universities can be very difficult at first.
Yeah.
Trying to reconcile your personal identity and the pride of your struggle with the opportunities and peculiarities at Cambridge can be difficult. I have seen debates about the status of college puffers, college-branded puffer jackets, of whether it's elitist or not to be a member of the Cambridge Union, etc., etc. But my advice, this is me reading your words out, but my advice is just to try and ignore it. One of my main takeaways of this year has been to not bother myself with these things. Do you still stand by these reflections? Or do you feel like now, having served in these roles and participated in these conferences, that just ignoring it is not enough?
I think that when I say just ignore it, I mean, you shouldn't feel bad. So I think, just to start with the reconciliation point, coming into Cambridge, parents didn't go to, my mum didn't go to university, she didn't finish high school. My older sister didn't finish high school. Like, really had to put in a shift to get here. And I owe it to a lot of, you know, teachers and stuff for sorting me out to make sure I get here. So you come in very, like, I've earned my place here, and then suddenly you're met with, like, all of these, like, oh, you're, like, you know, complicit in all of these terrible things because you are, you know, embracing these, like, symbols of elitism and stuff. And I think that, like, you're almost expected to not have the Cambridge experience and not to embrace the opportunities available to you because you're, like, this beacon of, like, working class success, and you should only, like, you know, engage in, like, working class cultural activity, and you shouldn't be doing these things. That's when I say ignore it. I don't think... what I mean is, if you want to go to a formal, or you want to wear a puffer, or you want to be part of the union, or you want to embrace the opportunities available at Cambridge, and people are saying don't listen to them. But I do think there are things that need to be addressed. I think that, for example, I mentioned about the issue of, like, the Cambridge Union being elitist or whatever. You know, I'm a member of the Cambridge Union. I went along the first year, I go a lot less this year. But there are, you know, real issues with the Cambridge Union that do need to be addressed. But I don't think we should be saying, don't go to the Cambridge Union, you know. I don't like to get too involved in union politics. It's not really my space. But I think like, fundamentally, it's a great institution. I think that, like, there's amazing opportunities to, like, hear people speak that you shouldn't pass up on just because there has been a little bit of, like, problematic activity in places.
So, on this kind of idea that I guess working class people perhaps feel of that dual identity, what do you think? Again, this is very much generalising, as you mentioned. You know, the 93% Club is actually a very non-homogenous group. There's a lot of diversity in there, and likewise, when we talk about private school, it's actually far more diverse than people give credit for.
Yes.
But as a generalised group, what do you think the so-called 7% can do to help the 93% in the context of Cambridge, at least?
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's really, like... like, I don't want to encourage some weird, like, saviourist mentality or some, like, weird, like, you know, almost, like, patronising support system or whatever. But I think that, like, the main thing, I think as someone who went to state school and have had negative interactions with some people that go to private school, is to just really try to understand your privilege and not to try and, like, compare your struggles with the struggles of other people. I think sometimes, like, you know, maybe you'll make like a lol private school joke and you'll get, like, a list of things about why they're not privileged even though they went to private school, or about how, like, I don't know, they're not privileged because although they went to Westminster, their parents had to work really hard. And I think there's almost like a super defensive culture sometimes about, you know, defending the fact that you've actually had to work hard. I don't think that anyone can really say that, you know, because you went to private school, you didn't have to work hard to get here. I think it's fair to say maybe you didn't have to work as hard, but you still have to work hard. You still have to be, you know, incredibly gifted to make it this far and to do well at Cambridge. So I think in terms of what they can do to help is really just try to check your privileges as much as you can and to try and be more aware and considerate of the fact that people have had backgrounds that maybe you don't even realise if something actually happens in real life, you know. Like,
conversely, do you think that you have learned anything about those 7% that you perhaps hadn't realised beforehand, say a year or two ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, I just assumed that, like, coming into Cambridge, that if you went to private school, you're going to be a terrible person. Like, genuinely, I have some really, 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 really great friends now. And, like, if you told me, particularly as, like, a 16-year-old, that I'd be hanging around with people who went to, like, some of the biggest private schools in the country, I would, like, you know, laugh at you. And I think that's where I come from. I live on the East Coast. We have some private schools near us, but I didn't know anybody who went to private school apart from some people that I'd met at, like, a debating competition, who were the most insufferable people ever. Like I can remember vividly, I was at the debating competition, and the chair who went to this private school, he ended it by saying, "Time doth constrain us," and I was like, this isn't in my mind what I imagined coming in to like Cambridge, people from private schools work. But I think so. The thing that I've learned really is that, you know, you shouldn't make such big generalizations about people, but also that people have had like real struggles, you know, that are not necessarily material or financial, that you should also consider to be important, because they have had their own personal battles as well, which might not be, you know, educational or economic.
So, dealing with these structural issues, where would you say are the root problems, like the root causes of these issues? Because I feel like at times when you just focus on like a particular program in college, you're more addressing a symptom of a wider issue, but where is the root, and what needs to be done either on a community level or a nation level or even a global level? Like where do you see the roots of these issues?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question, right? And like, it depends what level you want to pick it up at. But I think that like, if we keep it like within the realm of like education, as far as we can do, I think that like Cambridge is, you know, it operates in a difficult space. I think that like the challenge of having a cohort that's fully representative of the makeup of the you know of the country is actually very difficult in a deeply unequal society, right? Yep. Like, to be a world-class academic institution, and also try to be to have the best of the best students, and then also to be completely representative is difficult
in an unequal society.
People don't like to say that sometimes, because, but it's really hard to contextualize things, and to get that contextualization right. And I think that I don't have all the answers, and I do think that Cambridge could be doing more. But it's not a case that like overnight you could just, you know, drop the whatever it is, like, I don't know if the statistic is like 30% down to 7%. But I think that improvements need to be made in the broader like educational sector. I think that like underfunding has been a problem for too long. I think that shoving so many like failing schools into mats that, you know, aren't necessarily doing a great job isn't helping. I think that one of the biggest things for me that needs to be addressed is just like reading. Reading is a huge problem. So many kids getting into high school who are unable to read, and then being completely failed by secondary education, and then never even being able to imagine the possibility of going to Cambridge. I think there are so many problems that are so detached from Cambridge and Oxford, and, you know, these top Premium universities and top institutions, that need to be addressed before you can consider making Cambridge fully diverse. So I know it's difficult. I think with the structural things, it's hard to place them, and it's hard to point to where to start, really, I think.
What did it... So that moment when you received the confirmation from Cambridge, what did it feel like? What did it look like? What did it sound like and smell like, if we were to bring it back into that moment? Where were you?
Well,
paint me the picture of that moment.
Of course, man. I remember when I was sat at my dinner table, online learning, right? So I'm sat in a law lesson online, like waiting for the email, like refreshing constantly, and I remember seeing it, and I just screamed, like not even like a human scream, no words. I was just jumping. I was like, this is crazy, because I think that I always had confidence in myself. I always thought like, you know, I can do this, I can get in. But I think that like when you actually see the offer, when you see like you've got the offer, it's like, it's crazy, because you know in that moment it's going to be life changing. Like, you know that like you're going to Cambridge, like despite all that's happened in your life, you're going to Cambridge, and that's going to set you up, you know, for the rest of your life. You really take hold of that opportunity. I was ecstatic. Yeah, I was so gassed.
Were you surrounded by people? And
I actually wasn't. I think I think everyone was in bed still. It was like, taking the opportunity of my younger siblings. I have 3 younger siblings. Clearly who weren't doing their online learning because they were in bed. And my mum too was also in bed. So it was like fairly early in the morning.
When your mum first found out, what was her reaction?
Yeah, she was very happy. I think she was also somewhat like half asleep because I was just ran into her room. I was like, "Mom, I got in." But yeah, no, I think she was happy. I think that this is a big issue in a different way, but I think that she doesn't fully understand that it's actually quite a big thing. But I think just the idea of going to university for her was substantial in itself.
What do you make about, in HSPS you would, read about Boudoir and cultural capital and all of these concepts to kind of, talk about like class consciousness and auto theory. Do you think there's a merit in those ideas? Because education, right, not everyone necessarily sees Cambridge as I think most people would see Cambridge as a really impressive thing, but people value it to varying extent. And from a cultural capital perspective, one argument might be, and not saying I agree with this, but one argument might be that, the wealthy, having gone through the education, they see what opportunities can bring, but other people may not fully comprehend what an opportunity like Cambridge could mean. Like, so having done the theoretical reading now, along with your own personal experience, what do you make about that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things there. I think that, cultural capital is incredibly important. I think it's incredibly important in the admissions process. And actually, I think...
it's like a firm handshake, right? You get taught that in a private school, but elsewhere you might not.
Yeah, I think there are just I think that, cultural capital has become a bit of a buzzword, actually, in the educational sector. I work in a school, you hear the words cultural capital everywhere. Yep. And I often think that people don't actually understand what it means.
Sure.
But I think, just sort of broadening your horizons and reading and understanding what's going on in the world, and all of these things are incredibly important. But I do think there's truth in not fully understanding what Cambridge can offer you. And I think, Bourdieu talks about, habitus and self-selection and these things, and people not even considering going to, university or to Oxbridge or, not even recognising that to be an opportunity for them. And I think that's a real thing. I think that, both in my work at my high school and in my sixth form previously, much of my job is actually just, sitting people down and being no, you actually can do this. This is really, available to you if you, grab it with both hands and you run with it. You really try. I think, there's a quote, I can't remember who it's by, about, being the architect of your environment. And that's huge to me. I think that people sometimes... I think unfairly a picture is painted sometimes of people sort of wallowing and having almost a victim mentality where they're been failed by the system and therefore they don't bother. I think that's nonsense. I don't think that's true at all. And I think people who are ignorant to the realities of being materially disadvantaged sometimes will try to perpetuate that narrative. I think the reality of it is people actually just don't realise what opportunities are out there. And if they do, not enough has been done to make them feel like those opportunities are available to them and that they can thrive in those opportunities. So I definitely think there is a marrying of theory and practice there that I have, realised in my own experiences.
One of your motto, moving forward whilst giving back. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I randomly just said it at some point, and I thought, this is actually a very good way of phrasing the way that I view.
Could I challenge you on that though?
Sure.
I'm not exactly a fan of the word whilst, so it's moving forwards whilst giving back, because I feel like it implies that moving forward and giving back are two very different things. And have you ever considered moving forward by giving back or moving forward through giving back?
I think they are all they're all slightly different, and I think that all of them I think are incredibly important in different ways. So I think that you can move forward by giving back, and you can move forward through giving back. But I think that, to me, that looks like... And I think that's actually probably more accurate depiction of what I do myself. Like, the work that I do is very much like... you know, I have all these great opportunities and I do these roles and whatever, but they are all about fundamentally trying to make people's lives better. Mm-hmm. So I think moving forward, by giving back and giving back, are probably a better representation.
So I think the most meaningful way to succeed is helping other people.
No, I completely agree. But I think what I mean by moving forward whilst giving back is that, like...
It's almost like an and, the whilst services at and, that you're doing both rather than trying to imply a dichotomy between the two. True. I
think it's just... It's not something that I like scream and shout about as like being like... I don't have like tattooing on my forehead or anything, but I think the idea is just, for me, is just to try to encourage people, like, no matter what you do, if you go and become a corporate lawyer or an investment banker or a whatever it is to, whilst you run away and do all of these great things, is to remember where you come from, to remember your roots, and to give back where you can. And I think that we should really try to encourage everybody to embrace that mentality. But
one other massive step forward for you was being able to study at Harvard for a social studies exchange program. What did that mean for you to get a chance to study at Harvard?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, man. I think that, like, Cambridge is a crazy place, right? But I think that, like, Harvard has, like, a different level of sort of, like, cultural significance. It's a lot of films, whether it's not, like, The Social Network or it's, Suits or whatever it is. Like, you see Harvard as being glorified to a ridiculous extent. And I think that getting into Cambridge for me was crazy. But going to Harvard was the next level. It was like really like, oh my God, like I'm actually going. Like I'm actually gonna, be there. I'm gonna be at Harvard. I think it meant a lot to me. I think it was a real symbol for me of like, not making it necessarily, but of success and of really having like, this is, I've worked hard and now I get to, go.
Because I know you're very aware of the power of positive role model. And, for your siblings, for example, to know that their older brother has gone to Cambridge and now has an opportunity to study at Harvard, it expands their horizons, right? And surely there's that sense of fulfillment knowing that you could now inspire someone to push and take that next step.
No, definitely. I think that like it gave me an extra level of that. I think that like to say to my siblings and also the kids that I work with, like I was you 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and I've just been able to go to the United States to this amazing university. You can do it too. And I think that there's an extra level of almost like awe around it than, you could go an hour and 45 minutes down the road to Cambridge.
I mean, I'm not sure if you've seen... Actually, you would have seen my podcast cover with all the photos of the kids who I used to mentor. And one of the reasons why I have all their photos there is that I find that when I contextualize my achievements like through the lens of their eyes, it becomes so much more significant because it's not about you anymore. It's about the impact that your achievement and your hard work can create for other people.
100%.
And I think what I really admire about you through all the outreach and accessibility and leadership roles that you've had, there's a really strong awareness of not just the wider population community, but also the next generation. So I think having both dimensions seems to be something that you have taken a lot of pride in. And I was wondering, have you always had that, and if so, if not, where and how did you develop that awareness?
Yeah, I think that I think it really came to me strongly only in sixth form. I think that I don't think I really ever in high school I don't think too deeply about academia or jobs or about anything really. I was just sort of getting on with my life in a very I don't even know. It's so weird. I never was even conscious at high school. I thought it was just on autopilot. But I think when I started studying politics at sixth form. That's when it really, really set in for me. And it was, a real sort of eye-opener. I never really kept up with politics in high school. I never really understood what was going on. I think I knew that, I knew that these issues were, like, really important. But I don't think I ever, like, considered myself to be a champion of them or to try and really make a difference until I started studying politics. And that was sort of my, like, political and, like, sort of moral awakening in a way. I don't know, it's a weird way of putting it, but...
That's great. You mentioned tattoos three questions ago, and I can see one right on your arm. What's the meaning of it?
I've got a few. I mean, like... So they're all Greek. They're all Greek mythology, which I think, I keep getting jokes about being a Percy Jackson kid. I actually wasn't. I didn't read them until I was in, like, high school. But I think, our generation is obsessed with Greek mythology, a lot of people. But I think, I don't know, I've always wanted to get tattoos. I think I like the aesthetic. All my mates, we've all got them. But I think each one of them has a level of significance for me. I think that, like, Icarus is a reminder to not let, arrogance get the better of you, and sort of almost a reminder to, like...
Get to Harvard, but,
Yeah, like, like, don't fly too high, like, remember, you're not, you are... It's almost like I remember where you come from, like, you're not meant to be.
Okay. That's nice.
And then Prometheus is, I think it just looks cool, honestly, but I think the idea of, like, taking fire from the gods and giving it to the people or whatever is, it's like a metaphor there. And then Sisyphus, I mean, like, Albert Camus, the philosophy, I think it's interesting. But I think just, like, the physical, like, aesthetic of just, like, pushing the boulder and just, like, there are endless challenges, but it is also an endless reminder to just keep moving and to keep pushing on.
I mean, having those reminders would suggest to me that you have certain standards or ideals of the man you want to be. Could you, I know it's always hard to put into words, but could you maybe contextualize or describe a little bit more about who that man is? Like, who are you trying to become in 5, 10, 20 years' time, and how would you like people to remember Jezz Brown?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the big question, right? That's the real important question, I think, to everybody, is how do you want to be remembered? And, like, it's very like, cliche, but, I want to be remembered as somebody who dedicated their life to really trying to make a difference. And I think that this is a mentality I think I've always had. When I was younger, I wanted to be in the army, and because at the time, to me, that was like me making a difference. It was like
duty.
Yeah, it was like you giving up your life for the
country,
for what I thought at the time was the greater good as, like, a young child.
Yep.
And I think I've always had that in the back of my mind. It just maybe wasn't politicised. But I think that's it. I think I want to be remembered as somebody who cared about other people and sought to make a difference in the world. It's difficult. It's a difficult thing to describe, I think.
But do you find yourself thinking about that ideal often?
Yeah, I think sometimes I feel a bit conflicted, and with how to go about that, and, like, I think if we want to talk about, like, graduate roles and jobs and things like that, like, there's almost like you're almost like forced, you're almost like sort of like shoved into the corporate pipeline a little bit. It always feels like you are. It's like you have to go and do a vacation scheme, or you have to go and do an investment banking internship, or you have to go and do whatever. And I think I struggle sometimes with sticking to the fact that I do want to be in, like, the public sector, or I do want to be in charity, I do want to be in a place where we're making a difference.
You got these non-profit organisations like the 93% Foundation, SEO in London, etc. Then you got the private sector, the law firms, the banks, the consulting companies, etc., etc. You got the government and all these different stakeholders. Do you feel like some sectors are inherently more moral than others, or do you just feel like they are just a part of a bigger living organism, each playing their unique role?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that, I do think that some are more moral than others. I think that, like, ultimately, if you work in charity or you work for an NGO, like, the express point of your work is to, make a difference. I think that if you work, I don't know, for, you work in investment banking or whatever, you work in some parts of consulting, although I think some parts of consulting are really great, or you work in some parts of law, like, I would question what positive impact you're really having in, like, the tangible experience of real people's lives. When you're on the ground helping people versus moving money around or doing paperwork for big corporations who, you're defending share when they kill, like, millions of fish and, poison the ocean, I think there is some things that are more moral than others, but I'm not going to sit and subscribe to a weird moral hierarchy where it's like, if you're in the corporate world, you're bad, and if you're not, then you're, like, a moral saint. I don't think that's true. I think that, like, there are ways to be in the corporate world and to do really, really great work. And equally, actually, the public sector and charity and NGOs are not always quite as, morally driven as they like to present themselves to be. And the individuals within them that applies to as well.
Where do you see yourself applying to in the next year? Because you're entering this time of uni where you're looking at these grad scheme if you want to go corporate, and what have you have you got a CV, and have you chucked your CVs in any application things?
Yeah, I'm a lost man, honestly. Like, it's tough. It's something I've been struggling with the last week because of, it's sort of like my work is done now, and I want to make sure that I'm taking use of this time to apply for internships. I think that I'm being more convinced to do a small stint in the corporate world. I think that, like, what I'm hearing a lot from people I'm talking to who work in, like, very large charities is they really, really value some corporate experience.
What does a short stint mean? Like 2 years, 5 years, 20 years?
Definitely not 20. I think 5 or less.
5 or less.
Have
you heard of the golden handcuff?
Is this the idea that once you're in and the money's flowing, you don't leave?
Yeah, because you get used to that lifestyle, and then you realise, well, actually, the issue's so big that I alone probably will struggle to contain it. So there's nothing morally wrong with me just looking after my own interests. Have you worried about that at all?
I think a little bit. I think that, like, first of all, I think that's incredibly valid. I think that, like, nothing against people who decide. It's nobody's fault that the world is the way that it is. And I'm not one of those people that sit here and say every single person should go and do, like, should give up their life and try and solve the problem that they didn't create. So I if you are one of those people who seek to work in charity or education or whatever, and then you go into the corporate world and you stay there, fair enough. I like to think, I don't consider myself to be particularly materially driven. I think because of the way that I grew up and because of my background, I don't really care too much about having a high salary job or a having that lifestyle. But I'm not gonna sit here and say that, like, again, I'm a moral saint and I know for absolute certainty that won't happen to me, because I'm aware that 1,000,001 people before me have tried to say that, and they've been stuck in the corporate trap. But I really think that your 20s is your time to give it a go. I think that, like, people, the job world is changing and it's more acceptable to move sectors now. I think if it ever was true, which I'm not sure it was, that you had to pick your career from the beginning and stay in it, it's definitely not anymore. And I think there's a lot of intersection. A lot of people move between charity and civil service and consulting. Like, it is much more fluid than, at least through conversations that I've had with people in those sectors, than it's often presented to be.
Would it be right to assume, with all the discussions of class inequality in private school, state school, that you agree that private school, on average, again, a generalisation, offers more educational opportunities?
Yeah.
with that premise, then, if you are a father one day, would you send your kids to a private school?
Absolutely not.
What? That doesn't make much.
Yeah. So
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I have this conversation all the time. I think that. So again, I don't think that anyone. I don't think. That,
I guess the second premise, which I assumed, is you want to give your kids the best educational opportunity.
Yes, I mean, also true, but like, so I don't think there's anything wrong with parents sending their kids to private schools. Right, you want your kids to succeed, and to be the best versions of themselves.
Yep.
Right. However, I think that like. We know that it's not impossible to do that in state school, and I think that it would be important to me that my kids, if I have kids, I'm not sure that I definitely want to have kids, but it would be important to me that my kids were grounded and had maybe a nicer experience than I did, but and a more comfortable one. But I think that I can't envision myself sending them to private school.
Then to be more grounded, elaborate.
Yeah, I think that like there is a not universal tendency, but I think that like a tendency for you put rich kids or more privileged kids in one room, and they spend 14 years with only rich kids predominantly, and you come out with a level of not ignorance necessarily, because that sounds mean, but like I think that like how much one of those things when the camera's on, it's like a little bit difficult to talk about, but I think that just to be more aware of the real experiences that other people have around them. I think that it's a difficult thing for me to.
So I guess I guess what you're trying to say is, it's hard to truly understand the lives of most people when you're living in a very small bubble of privilege.
I think that's a good way of putting it.
Okay. So with that then, like, say if we pull it into topics of dating and stuff, do you feel like it's harder for people of supposed, and we are assuming that these class differences are a very clear cut, assuming that they are. Do you think it's a challenge, say in dating, for example, for people of different class to truly understand the different values and different lived experiences and the different challenges? Or do you feel like that's just one dimension of life, that there are other things that...
Yeah.
If you get what I mean.
I mean, it's definitely one dimension of life, right? It's definitely not the be-all and end-all.
Yeah.
I think that, like, if you're someone who's grew up very materially deprived and you're dating someone who went to Eton, you're going to have maybe some, like...
Yeah.
different views on life and about money and about like privilege and what's normal for families and not. But I don't think it's like a kryptonite, right? Like, I don't think it's like you can't date someone who's had a vastly different experience, because everybody's had different experiences, right? Like, you don't want to date somebody that's had the exact same life as you. Like, where's the fun? Like, but yeah, so I don't think it's at all a huge deal. I think as long as both sides are willing to seek to understand the lives and experiences of other people and why they potentially have different perceptions, I think that willingness is the important thing.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. So you mentioned that you have met some private school, elite private school, I'm assuming, like Eton, Westminster, Harrow, etc.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the stereotypes are true?
For some people, like, actually, I think Jesus is so chill. Like, I would say that, like, we have people at Jesus who are, like...
So, I mean, if it's for some people, right, that means for some people it's not true. How have they been more grounded? And have you got any theories on how they have been able to have that educational privilege and yet still realise their place in the world and perhaps using that privilege to serve the community. And it's almost like what you're in now, where you're in Cambridge, you're in so-called the private school of higher education. Can you still be a grounded citizen? And I think the answer is, of course, yes.
Yes.
But how do you actually stay grounded within a very privileged and elite environment?
Yeah, again, big question. A difficult one too. I think that like it goes down to being very intentional. I think that people, I think first of all you have to really, again, if you are one of these, and it's true for me too, right? Like as now a Cambridge student, and this is one of the crazy things. So like my friend Ben said this to me the other day. He was like, "Jezz, you do know if you have kids, they're middle class, right?" And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I'm in it now. Like I'm in, but yeah, I think first of all, it's about being like super intentional. I think it's about, you can be both proud of yourself and say you've worked really hard, and also recognise that, you had some help along the way. I think that's very important. I think that the first problem is always this. It's the, yes, people, again, I think this is what I was talking about in that arc we mentioned earlier, about the pride of your struggle and the privilege that you have. Okay, I think being able to see them both as being compatible is important, firstly. Yeah, that's where I start, I think, with that. I think I've lost the
yeah, I guess the question was that, we've been talking about the distinction between the 7% and the 93%, and in a sense, by being at Cambridge, you are a part of that elite group. And how do you intend to stay grounded?
Sure.
And your number one strategy was obviously be intentional, and you've got your tattoos there to remind you not to fly too high. And we're also discussing this on the backdrop that some of the private school kids who you have met hold their stereotype, which means that some don't fit that stereotype, meaning that they have successfully had educational privileges but use these opportunities in a productive way. And obviously that's what you want for most kids, right? Which is for them to have the best opportunities and yet be self-conscious and also aware and caring and of other people and the wider community. And I don't expect you to have the answer, but I thought it would be quite cool to capture some of your current thoughts and to listen back in maybe a decade's time to see.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think personally about how I stay grounded despite being at such a privileged institution is I go home. I go home and it's almost like, as I said this before, but like driving in and out of Cambridge is like, it's literally like, I don't know, you're like the bubble peels away and the real world exists. I think, but I know do I go home, nor do I leave my like incredibly, bougie college to go to my like, I live in my quite small council house at home. But I work with these kids who are the constant reminder of who I was 5-6 years ago. So I think I remain grounded by really sticking to my roots as much as I can do. And that's quite important to me that I give back in that way.
So do you worry that if you do have kids, as your mate said, that they will be in the middle class, that they would lose that grounding?
I don't think so. I think that I hope that I would raise them in a way that they wouldn't. I'd like to think that my kids would be very socially aware. But again, this is a lot of hypotheticals. If I have kids, but yeah, I don't think it's impossible to be grounded and also to be middle class. I think that's a ridiculous proposition that you can't be.
Yeah, for sure.
I think more. No, in fact, I think more than not, people probably are.
Okay. Given that again, the podcast is about giving guests a legacy-worthy interview, and I want you to keep this recording and be able to listen back in 10, 20 years' time. Is there anything else that you feel like is particularly meaningful for you that that captures a snapshot of who you are at this point in time that you want to be featured in the recording? Now's the time to share, and if not, I've got one or two final questions to wrap up.
Damn, it's put me on the spot.
Always.
Yeah. I guess it's the nature of these sorts of things. But I think that I think just really capturing the essence of I guess like my main message I'd say is to try and be more grounded and to try and give back in the way that you can. And we've talked a lot about this, but I think that it's so cliche, but my constant push is that if we all tried to just give back a little bit more, the world will be a much better place. And that's all I have to say, because I'm blanking on that. But yeah,
you've anticipated my final question, which is your final message, which you've already said. So I'm going to have to think of the final question on the spot. And I guess if you were one day fortunate enough to serve in a significant role, I mean, to be fair, every role is significant, but say like Prime Minister, in your first address to the nation, what issues, what 2 or 3 issues would you highlight, and correspondingly, what 2 or 3 things would you like people to be aware of? And that would be the final.
That's a great question.
An open-ended one for you to share a bit more about the overall themes that we've shared.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not a Blairite, but I think the words, education. I think, really, I think that we have, as a nation, I think we have such pride in, the NHS. And we see it be brutalised and underfunded. And we have such pride in the education opportunities in this country. And yet we let them be so underfunded and brutalised. I think that, I think probably these two would be my big things. But with education in particular, really encouraging and fostering a culture of real equality of opportunity that starts at the youngest stage, that starts in preschool, and really recognising the intersectionality of issues that children face, and the need to address material poverty, issues of family and issues of the home, and marrying that with the real educational side of things, with the ensuring that there are free preschools and nurseries that are properly funded, and that there are smaller class sizes, and that cultural capital is introduced in the curriculum, and the curriculum is diverse, and all of these things. I think that education is, it's very obviously my passion. But we also know healthcare and transport and all of these things. I think that I would probably be Rishi Sunak's biggest nightmare and throw money everywhere. I think that's probably where I'd start.
Great. Have you enjoyed the podcast? You don't regret doing it?
No, not at all. I think it's great. I think it's great to be put on the spot. I think that there are definitely been some great questions, and something that I need to think about more and could definitely better vocalise. But I think that it's always a good exercise for yourself to be forced to self-reflect and to really interrogate as well. To really interrogate your motivations and your beliefs, to better articulate, and always seek to better articulate.
Well, I thought, and I'm sure the listeners now would absolutely agree that you spoke very eloquently, and there's also a sense of passion that comes through of how much you really, really, really care about these issues relating to education access, and part of it, I guess, is your own upbringing, seeing your home and that kind of grounding that we talked about. But I just find your leadership style very inspiring. I think you've done some fantastic work in Jesus JCR, for the Class Act campaign, for Elevate, for 93% Foundation. Yep. And I think if you can continue to put all the great talents that you have into uses like that, the world will inevitably be a better place. And I just want to thank you for coming to Clare at the end of the term when it's miserable and rainy outside to be here. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you a bit more.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for your time, Jezz.
Yeah, thank you very much.